Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Are you following that at all, Dean? There's plenty of stuff to talk about, but are you following any of that with Barr's nomination?
I haven't been. I have been following the lack of impact on freight rates in Florida. One of the things I was following this week was some of the growers out here in Salinas that were saying it was hard to get trucks to run to Florida, for example, because a lot of the guys just weren't interested in running to a lot of the English-speaking truckers, especially the Punjab Sikh drivers here, just weren't interested in running, the English-speaking, mind you, weren't interested in running to Florida because of being hassled. And they had no interest in running to Florida because most of the produce that runs out of here, anything more than a 2-day delivery out of Salinas, goes on teams. And they had no interest in running to Florida because they're just going to be harassed. But they had plenty of interest in running to the Northeast, for example. So what I was looking at was the potential impact on freight rates. But of course, demand is down, so the impact on freight rates was muted. So we weren't seeing anything. So that's the only thing I was looking at, was any potential impact on rates. And rates, of course, were falling nationally. So there was no impact from any of that on any observable impact beyond seasonality, Jimmy Mack.
Yeah, and by the way, to kind of amplify your point about the confirmation of Barr, our good friend Tom Bray and I had a talk, and I talked to other people from the CVSA. They really are high on Barrs in regards to being a square shooter, in regards to being a fair-minded guy. And given how much Duffy is stretched thin with the FAA and also being put in charge of Space Force and NASA and all that, by getting Barrs over there, we'll get some clarity and maybe allow our friends in the Punjabi Trucking Association to feel they can go there with a little bit more safety if there's somebody with a firm hand like Barr, kind of, keeping it all straight and right for those people who, are working hard and playing by the rules and being here. We got Marshall on the phone, by the way, Dean. He wants to make some Salinas recommendations food-wise. Let's bring him on now. Hey, Marshall, good morning. Road Gang Radio loves you.
Good morning. I'm glad you stopped at the Tennessee, my favorite truck stop. Love that bar.
Oh, yeah.
There. You didn't get to see just the patio up there, but it is a great place to stop if you got time. Dean, if you're going to go south out of there on 101 and then cut across, I think that's 46, a couple interesting things. One, there's a real good restaurant, old independent restaurant and a truck stop there in Greenfield. It's on the south end of Greenfield. I think it may be a pilot there now. I'm not sure. But the restaurant is independent. It's really good food there. Old school, real food cafe place. Paso Robles, just before you get to Paso Robles, there's a little truck stop there with a real good restaurant. And then if you cut across on 46, like you're going over to Bakersfield and on back east on 40, there's an interesting little place there. I can't remember what road it is that cuts out there. That's where James Dean died, in his accident. And they have a little James Dean memorial there at a little cafe and fruit stand. And if you want to buy some pretty good fruit, they have really good fruit there as well.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll check it out today. I've got some time today.
Another great place, if you go that way, is over by Picacho Pass there, is the Casa de Fruta restaurant, truck stop, winery, little train that runs around for the kids and stuff, bunch of old farm equipment and trucks there, great food, fantastic people, plenty of parking, and it's, I think that's 166, right just past Hollister. You may be going to go north out of there and don't want to go through San Francisco. You can cut across that way and up to Sacramento and get on 80. But I don't know what your itinerary is and how much time you got. But anyhow, that's just a few spots that I really like stopping at. I used to load every week in Salinas during the season, and then move down the coast and load out of Santa Maria and Oxnard and LA and then Yuma in the wintertime. You go to Yuma and on across. I hauled produce for 20, 25 years. That was
right.
All I did. I hauled LTL produce, less than truckload. So I did 12, 13 pickups out there in that area every week.
I was at the Central Coast Cooler yesterday watching a bunch of LTL trucks getting loaded. They were loading them in and out in a couple of hours, they were saying.
That was the best part about the LTL. The guys that were sitting in there waiting for full trailer loads, they might have to sit there for 8-9 hours. If you're just coming in for 1 or 2 pallets, you get in and out a lot quicker.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Marshall, thank you for the... I got to tell you, what a bunch of great recommendations, by the way. What a great way to start the morning here on this fantastic Full Throttle Thursday on Road Gang Radio. Dean Croke, as always, joins us, always earlier than he's actually scheduled for, because I just wouldn't have it any other way. It's great to have him. He's over in Salinas. I hope you guys were listening to Marshall, by the way, because his recommendations, I want to go try all those places, by the way. If you ever get a chance, Dean, you should head over to the Tennessean if you're in this neck of the woods. It's a great truck stop, and it's got some great amenities and some really friendly people. By the way, our good friend Trucker Boaston says he has 4 stops in the Kansas City area in 3 hours today. Good luck. Ooh. Absolutely good luck. I mean, good God Almighty. Trey, we're going to take a break here. So, bring up that music. We'll get out of here, give you a little taste of New Orleans. Yeah, we're over here in the Fastport studio. I'm going to see the Fastport guys this evening over in Ohio, in Columbus. Then go to Chillicothe to the Kenworth plant. And then I'm going to go visit a ghost town after. I'll tell Dean about that when we come back.
Exceptional value and exceptional values. That's Bennett Trucking. A core commitment of faith, family, and freedom has driven Bennett to being the leading provider of innovative, integrated transportation solutions, both at home and abroad. Bennett's values are not just compatible with providing high-paying jobs and unmatched customer service. They're inseparable. If you're looking for an employer or a partner who believes the best business model is being a model citizen, then Bennett Trucking is the place for you. Go to BennettIG.com and find the folks who share your values.
Sapp Brothers appreciate you. That coffee pot is a promise of customer service that aligns with their values. And those folks are showing what they think of you for National Driver Appreciation Week by celebrating all September with scratch and win games, prize giveaways like Yeti coolers and UFC tickets, not to mention 10 full sets of steer tires with any PM service or 250 shop spend, all in the app. Download the app and be a part of a generous rewards program for professional drivers. $2 all-you-can-eat pancakes, steak specials, and cookouts and celebrations. Sapp Brothers serves professional truck drivers. First-rate travel centers, family-friendly restaurants, and world-class maintenance. It's a promise that they, the coffee pot, is there for you. Go to sappbros.net and find the values you expect from home and download the Sapp app.
St. Christopher Truckers Fund provides free health and wellness programs for drivers to help prevent some common medical conditions seen in the industry. These programs include diabetes prevention, Rigs Without Cigs, a tobacco and nicotine cessation program, Healthy Habits for the Long Haul, a 12-week total body wellness program, a vaccine voucher program that includes free flu, shingles, COVID, and pneumonia vaccines, and GPS, Get Preventative Screenings. That includes free at-home cancer screening tests. These programs are available to Class A over-the-road semi-truck drivers. For more information or to register for a program, visit the St. Christopher Fund website at truckersfund.org.
Welcome back to Road Gang Radio. Join Jimmy Mack and Lindsay Lawler's Gang of the Airwaves by subscribing to Radio Nemo on YouTube.
We celebrate all kinds.
Make it official. After all, if you're listening, you're already in the gang. The Road Gang.
Be hanging out with one of our favorite original members of the reconstituted Road Gang, Dean Croke, who, of course, so much of the studio over in New Orleans is the result of his hard labor. I'm not kidding. He didn't just come by and give moral support. He actually put together chairs. Dean, I don't know if you know this, but along with Lindsay's studio coming into focus, and all of this is headed towards the destination where we can start filming people in studio and figuring out ways to get, even you over where you are, wherever you are, on those screens as well. That back room that you know so well actually has a brand new table, has an entire wall of albums that Dre now switches out to kind of match the season. It's becoming exactly what we hoped it would be, kind of a locus, as it were, for the history of trucking radio. All of those great Justin Wilson albums are now up on the wall. Red Sovine's Phantom 309 is up there on the wall. All that kind of groovy stuff. And I'll be in Chillicothe tomorrow after being in Columbus tonight. This is really groovy. I don't know if you know this, but Chillicothe is only 13 minutes, about 13, 14 minutes from a place called Moonville, Ohio, which is a ghost town in Ohio. And Vinton County, which is right next to where we're going to be, has more ghost towns than any individual county in the United States. Now, a lot of them, I don't mean abandoned, sad places. A lot of them were coal mining towns and furnaces that when the economy changed, a lot of them have been turned into state parks and forest trails and all that stuff. But there's some really spooky history over there in regards to moving. I mean, basically, it's southern Ohio, which is northern Kentucky, which is southern Ohio. So it's all kind of the same kind of spooky, a place where the bluegrass turns black, kind of, is a way to kind of think about it. And I'll be heading over there because I'm on the road, because I'm not in a plane. I'll be driving, which means I have a couple of extra hours to kind of go check out some sites over the course of the weekend. Where do you head after Salinas?
This is a rather embarrassing story, and this could be one of those ones that ends up on my headstone. I'll share it with you because I think it's too important not to share you. I'm actually heading to Las Vegas, and I was heading to Las Vegas for Mine Expo, right? This is actually quite funny. But the problem is Mine Expo is not on until 2028. And for some reason, I thought it was on this weekend. And I don't know how I got this wrong. So I'm laying in bed here the other morning. I booked travel. Jimmy Mac, I'm staying at a hotel for 4 days. I'm going to go to Mine Expo because it's on every 4 years. For some reason, their website had 2025, or so I believed. And so I booked travel. I was going to spend 4 days at Mine Expo. It's the global conference for the mining industry, where all the big haul trucks and rubber tire dozers and excavators. I used to work in that industry for an Australian company. And all set to go, booked my travel, flying there this afternoon, and then their website pops up today and it says, "Here's our new date for 2028," and I'm going, "What?"
Oh my God!
And I was going on my way to see my son in Truckee anyway for some vacation next week. So anyway, I said to my wife, "You're not going to believe this. This is like either a really bad senior moment, and like my brain has had a short." Like I've had a miss, or somehow their website had the wrong date, and I caught them at a bad moment. But which I think is more likely because my brain is still firing because I just had some tests. So I actually think I'm in pretty good shape. But that's my story. I probably shouldn't be sharing this on public radio, but anyway,
no. I think bring your wife out to Vegas. By the way, just fly her out there. Yeah. I mean, maybe it's time you had a little bit of a vacation in Vegas. You get to see your son in Truckee and then head over. I mean, it works.
But how do you be 3 years off? It's hilarious. Like I wasn't just a week off. Or like a time zone out. I'm 3 years off.
Oh, Dean, I got to tell you, and given the schedule that you keep, and by the way, guys, you should really keep up with Dean on social media. You should keep up with him on Instagram and on Facebook and every place where he posts. Given the schedule you keep, this was bound to happen at some point. And here's the good news: at least you didn't end up in Alaska. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's really what it kind of comes down to. I mean, so Vegas isn't a bad place to accidentally end up. Not bad.
Well, Alaska's the only state I haven't been to. I actually would love to end up in Alaska. I would love to. I haven't been there. It's on my list of places to go.
Oh, by the way, I don't know if you know this, our late friend Jay Rohr, who was such a big friend to Dave and the first person to really welcome me to trucking. I actually met Jay on the floor at the Great American Truck Show before I did anything before that. He used to actually make a run. He would do 2 runs a year from Texas. He would bring one giant piece for an oil rig from Texas all the way to Alaska, and it was a 2-week run. And I asked him once, I said, if you did only those 2 runs, which is a total of 8 weeks, would it in fact cover your nut for the year? And he said it would actually. But what was really cool was he told this amazing story was the equipment was so expensive that he was bringing up that the company would not let him run the risk of running through the water, so that he had to go across bridges that didn't have the proper clearance. So they had to have bridge inspectors lower the pressure in his tires and stand on his truck to make sure that he would clear the bridges, some of the bridges that he would go to, because the equipment was so expensive. They worried about anything possibly damaging it. And I asked him if that was if that's tense, and he said, "Oh my God." He said, "I mean, it's one of the most incredibly intense experiences he's ever gone through in his life." By the way, I've only been to Anchorage, but flying in there, it's the one thing it and Hawaii have in common. They are these giant blasts of light in the middle of pitch darkness when you fly in at night. Yeah. And Anchorage, by the way, is the biggest geographical city in the United States. Not population. It's about 500,000 people, but the geographic spread of Anchorage is bigger than any place else in the United States because of how spread out the metropolitan area is, because of the wide open space of Alaska, which is really cool when you think about it.
Wow, I want to do the Dalton Highway. That's what I've been fascinated by, that haul road up to Prudhoe Bay. I almost got a gig up at the there's a big copper, I think it's a copper mine that Teck own right up in the top left of Alaska, right out in a very remote area. But just watching some of the documentaries of how the Dalton was built, when they built that pipeline, was kind of fascinating in and of itself. But I would love to do that trip. I'm not sure I'd like to do it in winter, because that looks like a pretty wild ride. Because I think there was a documentary series on Discovery, I think, on the Dalton. I think it was on Ice Road Truckers. I think they did a series on that particular road one season.
Yeah, and you can also, by the way, if you're following that road, there's a way of kind of doing that and kind of following the adventures of the great American author Jack London. There's a lot of popularity of kind of making your way through the Yukon towards Alaska, and a lot of people say that you can do it in a way. Also, if you want to do it in style, take the cruise. Leave Seattle and get on a cruise boat, and then you can see all the fjords. All right, I've totally taken us into the weeds here. Let's talk about lumber prices. This is really important, and this is one of the canaries in the coal mine.
And it kind of relates to the Fed's announcement yesterday that interest rates are coming down, although they signaled it was only a very small cut yesterday, but they signaled maybe 2 more cuts are on the way. So that's some good news. It's kind of it's good news. Let's just say it's good news. But one of the things we've been watching is, for flatbed truckers in particular, is the decline in lumber prices, because what they call the sawyers, the people that make lumber, have been announcing some pretty severe cuts to output. The big dog is Interfor, the third largest lumber producer in North America, recently announced cuts of about 12%. They said they're going to reduce production by about 145 million board feet. If you do the translation, that's the equivalent of something like a reduction by year end of about 12 to 14,000 flatbed truckloads across North America. So they're going to reduce hours, reconfig shifts, all sorts of things. Domtar have done the same in their Glenwood, Arkansas plant. So when you see this sort of thing happening, it just means less volume for truckers. Yesterday, the housing starts came out from the Census Bureau, so single-family housing starts came out. They were down 7% in August. Permits for single-family housing starts, they were down 2.2%. They were single-family housing starts, which are a really good indicator of flatbed demand, were at a 2.5-year low. So if you say, where's flatbed rates going and where's demand going, we're still heading south. Like, the demand doesn't look good. The only positive thing was that interest rates started to drop this week, but it's going to take time for that to pick up and demand to pick up. Now, if you look at it from a rate cycle perspective, we're in the seasonal low point of where flatbed rates always bottom out at this time of the year, and then they start to pick up when we get into the colder months of fall, and then they rise over the winter, and then they'll peak about May next year, and then they'll cool off again. So we're not seeing anything from a rate perspective where flatbed rates will do anything other than what they do seasonally. The good news is they're sitting about 10 cents a mile higher. This is the national average, about 10 cents a mile higher, excluding fuel, than last year. So flatbedders have had a much better year this year than last year and the year before. So that's some good news. So the economic indicators are not saying we're going to have a boom year in the next year, but we're not saying we're going to see the market collapse either, which is some good news also.
It's really good news, and I was so kind of delighted. I've seen a couple of things that head in that direction. If flatbeds can just hold steady, we might limp through. And I like I said, I don't want to be, I use the term limp, guys, not because I am, negative on it. I just don't want to. I don't want to paint a rosy picture of what's happening here, but if that holds steady, the American consumer, as you love to point out, as always, rises to the occasion and somehow, digs everybody, sometimes the world, out of these messes it sometimes gets itself into. So we'll keep a really close eye on that because, like I said, it's the first, what I would call, not bad news we've gotten in quite some time. I also want to point out, I think what the Fed is up to, and I want people to understand this, is that his concern, and it's why he signaled more rate cuts rather than one big one, his concern is that if he cuts them too much, he ignites inflation in the middle of a stagnant economic period, and a stagnant economic period with inflation has a word for it that people have not mentioned since the 1970s. Genuine stagflation would be a bad thing. He's just being very cautious. Like I said, a bigger cut might excite people, but it might do damage, whereas he can maybe see the reaction to this and then slowly work our way there. That might be the way out of this, by the way. Those slow cuts with the flatbed. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Dean.
Well, no, I think that has to be the course of action because we still haven't got to the finish line of where tariffs end up. Like, we don't know what the finish line looks like there because that's the key thing that's got our shippers that create demand for our freight. That's what's got them in pause mode still. Like, there's still a lot of economic uncertainty around what our shippers are thinking. Just last week at the FDR conference, there was a lot of concern about shipper demand. Some of the big truckload carriers were talking about shippers have never been in a more what was the word they used? Flummoxed was the word that we heard some economic analysts talk about. Some of the big truckload carriers where they're talking about their operating costs were cut to the bone. There was still excess capacity. Their shippers have never been in a more uncertain planning environment. So we're still in this really uncertain situation where volumes are steady. They're very uncertain. Jimmy Mac, one of the things that was very interesting, I thought, from the FTR annual conference last week was that the large truckload carriers are still the operating losses operating performance was still at post-Great Recession levels. So they're not making a lot of money. In fact, they're not doing so well. But they were talking about, and this was a general consensus, they were talking about economic recovery and cost pressures and excess capacity and rising costs persisting for another 12 to 18 months, and that a real turnaround wasn't expected until 2027, which I thought was, I had resisted talking about that time frame. But the more we get into this and the more economic certainty we have and the longer this drags on in terms of not knowing where tariffs end up, it's a possibility that next year is still a pretty flat market. And we talked about the market being stuck, the freight market being stuck. On our last show, we talked about freight rates being almost identical to 2023 and 2024. Because when you look at where freight rates are, they're identical. September rates are almost identical within a few pennies of the last 3 years. So the market is kind of stuck. It's not going anywhere. There's nothing going up or going down. Now, on some lanes, like produce out of the Pacific Northwest is starting to move. Like on regional lanes, there's some volatility. But if you say, where is the entire national freight market? It's kind of stuck. It's not going anywhere. There's no volatility in the market that's going to say, oh, the market's flipped and rates are going to go up or they're going to go down. No, that's not happening. And it looks like it's going to remain in that phase potentially all of next year if we don't get something that's a major catalyst. Now, I don't know what that is, but there's nothing on the horizon that's going to fundamentally change the freight market just yet. So that's where we're sitting. And these were large truckload carriers at this meeting last week, some of our largest talking about how they see the freight market. And of course, they're reacting off how their large customers are seeing the freight market too.
Well, I have to tell you, one of the things that concerns me is there is one way that kind of gives us a big kick in the pants, and that's if the Russians continue to fly drones over Poland. Because even the president, who has made real efforts to kind of play nice with the Russians and suggest to them that there are exit ramps to this, even his patience is worn thin with this kind of stuff. And he made the tweet now saying, here we go, one more time. And I hate to say it, but we all know that weaponized Keynesianism often gives the economy a kick in the pants. And if suddenly we have to start spending money in factories over in Ohio and Indiana and Michigan again, that might be something of a catalyst to kind of look for, not look forward to. Nobody's looking forward to that. I want to make that really clear. And also, we've had amazingly, knock on wood, a really quiet Gulf. A really quiet Gulf of Mexico, which has been a stunner, an absolute stunner. And by the way, when I say stunner, I mean the people in New Orleans, Dean, knocking on wood. Please, Dre, knock on some wood over there, would you, for me? Thank you, brother. We are on tenterhooks as we slowly get to October, because if one or two cold fronts gets down in New Orleans, that's the lockdown. That's what shuts it down. People need to understand that if a good old-fashioned cold front makes its way into the Gulf of Mexico, that becomes a shutdown on the possibility of really severe storms hitting the Gulf Coast, which often acts as a catalyst economically, but often causes long-term disaster as well. In places like Lake Charles, where it affects the oil and the refineries and all that kind of stuff. We can go on and on with this. We got other stuff we got to cover here. We got to cover some stuff here, though. We got some ground to cover. So, can you talk also about the import situation? There is a lot of uncertainty because of the tariff, not because of tariffs, because of the uncertainty with tariffs. Like, either way, we would know something. We don't. But talk about what's going to happen in regards to imports.
Yeah, so we just came off of July where we had record levels. So this starts to affect carriers that are directly hauling off ports. So our port markets like Savannah, Houston, Los Angeles. So we had record volumes. In fact, Los Angeles set a 117-year-old record for the most number of containers. No surprise, August volumes were down about 8% in August from July. They're down about 3% compared to this time last year. So we're on the downside now, which is unusual because normally volumes would be going up. So because peak season normally is September, October. So when volumes are normally going up, they're going down. That's the important point. So we've already had peak season following the July surge because shippers were doing this thing called front loading, where they were bringing in imports earlier this year to avoid tariffs. So that's what filled a lot of our warehouses. That's why you're seeing a lot of earlier Halloween sales and a lot more earlier back to school sales this year. So that's good for consumers. But what it means is that we're seeing a big fall off in volumes this second half of the year. So for carriers involved in this, it means a slower second half, and it's what we call a second half of paybacks. For the higher volume of truckload freight you've had in the first half, we've got to pay back for that in the second half with lower volumes. John McCown, one of the experts in US or in international shipping, says that we're about to experience a 17.5% decline in the remaining 5 months of US import volume. That's significant. That year-over-year change in the volume in the next few months is the biggest change, he thinks, in 60 years of US container history. It's a really big drop-off. Now, but what he says that's really important is it's not just a blip, and it's solely due to tariffs, but it's not just US ports. It's North America. It's away from the US. So what he's seeing is that the volume's still going to come in, but come into Mexico and Canada away from the US. So there's the thought that it'll find its way into the US still, but from other directions, which is kind of bizarre. But it's looked like this will be this drop off in imports directly into ports that benefit US truckers will persist for the duration of this current administration if we don't get some clarity around tariff and trade policy. So that's the brief. And this affects dray carriers, it affects carriers in inland intermodal ports like Kansas City and Memphis. Any dray carrier that's dependent on import volumes from China in particular will be impacted. So this is sort of something we've got to watch for the next 6 months. Imports are going to fall off because we benefited from a really big first half of the year.
Yeah, and by the way, I think at the end of the year it's going to be a wash. It's going to look on paper like a normal year. That's a really kind of important thing to do.
Exactly.
So don't let anybody point to any numbers to you guys and tell you guys, oh, hey, look, it was the same. It's always been. Nothing's really changed. The real impacts of tariffs, if in fact they end up being permanent, if in fact the Supreme Court rules in the administration's favor, we'll see in 2027 what a whole year under those conditions look like. There's no guarantee of that, by the way. There might not be a stomach for it, but that sets off a whole other series because it means that the people who actually invested in domestic production to some degree are going to take a hit there as well. There's a lot of known unknowns as we kind of head into this. Dean, I wanted to throw something against you. I've been meaning to talk to you about this. I want to make a case, a lot of people thought that, the English proficiency test would result in better economic conditions. You don't believe that, and I've never believed that either.
No.
The positive case I'd like to make for it, what is positive for me, is, we do a segment Education Station here on a regular basis, and a lot of the programs we talk to are 8-week programs, college programs, trade school programs that aren't just CDL mills. Where I think, if in fact the benefit of the proficiency is going to be, is not so much in an economic boon, but it might create a better generation of truckers down the line. That's where I think the real kind of positive thing comes in, because as we know, people who are what I call the immigrants who come in through proper process, who become usually very patriotic Americans, are more inclined actually to learn English. I do think that it will mean they'll have to, by proxy, take a harder look at a lot of the CDL mills out there. And that's kind of my take on it, why I'm in favor of it. I don't think it really helps the bottom line. What I think it helps, though, is create a better quality of trucker out there on the road, and probably brings down the temperature of a lot of our friends who are listening right now. And I'm always in favor of that. And I also want to point out, I want to distinguish also, because some people have pointed out that what happened in Florida was, in fact, a Punjabi. We need to distinguish between the Punjabi Trucking Association and people who are here illegally that come up through Mexico. And one of the concerns the Punjabis have is that they will get rolled in because they look like someone who did that. And I want to make sure people understand that as well, to kind of get into that there are people who are playing by the rules, and by the way, the CDL proposal from the OIDA members, all of whom are proficient in 2 languages, nice touch on their part, was really interesting. The idea of making the test required to take in English, and that becomes a measure of proficiency, and you can just show your English proficiency card to the person on the side of the road and remove the subjectivity of the test. I'm sorry to take you in the weeds, but I've been dying to talk to you about that. I think that's where the real benefit of the proficiency comes from, not economically, but creating a better generation of drivers.
Well, I think it goes beyond race and language. I think because I think the CDL training schools, I think there's been a big miss. So, I can't get past the. And I saw it this week, Jimmy Mac. People that will not pull forward in a fuel island. I don't think there's anything worse than the trucker that has a 30-minute break in their fuel island. There is probably nothing more disrespectful than taking a 30-minute break in the fuel island.
Yeah.
So when did that become a thing? Why are you so disrespectful to your fellow trucker that you think it's okay to take a 30-minute break in the fuel island? So that to me, if you do that to me is a really big red flag, because I think that gets to U-turns across the interstate. There's a whole lot of other stuff going on if you will do that. Now, I'm not saying that automatically leads to you can't speak English, but I will guarantee you if you do that, there's a whole lot of other stuff going on the road that other truck drivers are going to get a burr under their saddle about. And I think that comes back to training and taking the industry seriously and the job seriously, because that's like a code. Why that comes back to training. Like that's trucking 101. You fuel your truck up, you pull forward. That's why there's a yellow line there. You pull forward and you let your fellow trucker. Like, how does it happen that you don't have a CB radio in your truck anymore? Like, see, little basic things like that, I think, come back to training. Like your training school. Like, why don't they have tools in their truck anymore? Like, so I'm way too old school, clearly, that I would never get in a truck without my toolkit, right? But then maybe that's a thing of the past now because of regulations. But I think it comes back to training and how you take this job seriously. Is that there's certain things you do as a truck driver that are table stakes, and I think that's where our training it's a miss. Because I think the puppy mill style approach is we are too quick to get people into a truck to teach them how to steer. And I'm an advocate for, you have to be able to drive a truck, not steer a truck. And I think we've dumbed down trucks to way too low of a level where you can just sit there and steer without having to drive one. Now, those out there that know what I'm talking about, there's a whole lot more to driving a truck than just steering a truck, because you've got to connect with your outside world meaningfully. You've got to connect with your fellow drivers through communication methods. You've got to be coherent. And that means being able to speak and communicate. It means pulling your curtain back on the left-hand side of your mirror and waving, even the no-look wave. I joke about it on social media, but I'm a big advocate for the no-look wave, right? People think I'm joking about it, but man, I'm an expert at the no-look wave. Because it's a way of connecting and say, I see you. I'm looking at the road, but I see you. And I think it's absolutely critical, those sorts of communication methods. That has gone by the wayside. Now, I know I'm getting off on a tangent here, but you absolutely have to communicate, and it goes beyond the English language. You absolutely have to be able to communicate in English, even if it's broken English. But I think it goes beyond people from the subcontinent, from the Asian continent. It's Northern Africa. It's Eastern European. It's everybody that's come into this country, because we just had 9/11. And my wife reminded me of 9/11 was really when we had the anti-movement start. Jimmy Mack, we had anti-Muslim. When 9/11 started, that's when the whole world started moving everywhere. Like everybody moved everywhere, didn't they, to get away from what was happening in the Middle East. And everybody moved everywhere. And of course, we've now got to a point where everybody's saying enough of people moving everywhere. And that's what we're seeing right now. I think this is the tail end of enough of the movement.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right, and I think it really behooves, as you said. I mean, the thing is, too, is that if you're going to join a trucking culture, then you've got to learn that trucking culture. And the trucking culture, as you well know, in India is not the same as it is in Australia. The two that are the most similar, actually, not Canada and the U.S., it's the U.S. and Australia are the ones that actually have incredibly similar cultures in regards to no-look waves and a certain level of what I call the British urge to queue. All right, Dean, I got to get you out of here, man. It's great to see you. What a great final comment, by the way, for National Truck Driver Appreciation Week. I'm going to speak for Dean and I when I say if you really want to appreciate drivers, create new drivers who actually play by the rules everybody else has always played by, and we'll get along a whole lot better. Thank you, Dean.